All right, so today we're really diving deep into one of the most, everyone's heard of it, the Mueller Report.
It's a big one.
It is a big one, yeah. Volume 2 specifically. We're going to try to unpack, sort of like we always do, what exactly this report had to say about potential obstruction of justice by then President Trump.
Yeah, and I think what we're going to try to do today is sort of like sift through all of the legal stuff and really get down to what are some of the surprising moments and things that really make you think.
Okay, so before we get into the weeds, can you just set the stage for us a bit? What's the main focus of Volume 2?
Sure. So Volume 2 really centers on President Trump's actions in relation to the Russia investigation,
Okay.
particularly, how he interacted with officials, witnesses, things like that. And I think what's really interesting about Volume 2 is that Mueller himself, he kind of took a different approach.
Okay.
He didn't go the typical route, where they say, we're recommending charges or we found this person innocent. He didn't really give a yes or no answer about obstruction.
Wow, so he didn't make it easy.
No, he did not make it easy at all.
Okay.
He kind of said, here's all this evidence, here's all this analysis, you guys, Congress, you make the call.
Wow, that's a lot of pressure on Congress.
I know, right?
So, I think it goes without saying, the big question here is, did any of President Trump's actions actually amount to obstruction of justice?
Exactly. And to understand that, we have to understand what obstruction of justice even means. You have to prove two things: an obstructive act and corrupt intent. It's not enough to just show that he tried to influence the investigation. You've got to prove that he did it with his corrupt intention to protect himself, knowing that it was wrong.
Okay, so that corrupt intent is key. So where do we even begin with this?
Well, I think it's important to go back to the beginning and look at how Trump reacted when these Russia allegations first came to light.
Yeah, so how did he respond initially?
Publicly, he was extremely dismissive. He called it fake news, a witch hunt.
Right.
But then, privately, it's a little bit of a different story.
Okay.
He seemed to be pretty concerned about how these allegations would impact him, even questioning what the intelligence community was finding.
Really?
Yeah.
So he's saying one thing publicly, but then privately it's like, oh, wait a second. And this is all while this Trump Tower Moscow deal is in the works, right?
Exactly. And that's one of those things where you see the contrast in his actions versus maybe what he was saying publicly.
Yeah.
Because on one hand, he's denying any business ties with Russia. But then on the other, he's trying to make this deal for Trump Tower Moscow happen. Michael Cohen even testified about this party line to downplay any connections to Russia.
Okay, yeah, this is already getting complicated.
Why?
And we're just at the beginning.
Exactly.
So it seems like there's this pattern of him saying one thing publicly and then doing another privately. And
Yeah.
does this continue? Like with Comey, for example, with James Comey.
Yeah, absolutely. This is where I think the report starts to paint a picture of a potential pattern of behavior. So Comey was overseeing the FBI investigation into Russian interference, and Trump starts putting a lot of pressure on him. He's asking Comey for loyalty, urging him to drop the Flynn investigation, and of course then ultimately he fires Comey.
Yeah, and then you have Comey writing these memos, which is just, that was crazy when those came out.
Yeah, it was like out of a movie or something.
It really was. It was like, wait, what? All of a sudden we had these firsthand accounts of all the pressure Trump was putting on Comey. Those memos and Comey's testimony before Congress became kind of like these bombshell pieces of evidence.
Yeah, really key. And speaking of pressure,
Yeah.
Trump didn't just stop with Comey. He also went after Sessions, then Attorney General Jeff Sessions. And Sessions, of course, had recused himself from the whole Russia investigation.
Right, and Trump was not happy about that.
No, not at all.
He wanted Sessions to, reverse that, right? Didn't he try to get Sessions to unrecuse himself?
He really did, yeah.
Multiple times.
Yeah, multiple times. And he even suggested, Sessions would be like a hero if he took back control. And when that didn't work, then we see these public attacks on Sessions, even threats to his job.
It's really interesting to me how much effort he put into trying to control how this whole investigation was perceived.
Totally. It's not even just about influencing the investigation itself. It's about shaping the narrative, right? That whole thing with Lewandowski, Trump's lawyer. Remember, he tried to get Sessions to basically shut down the investigation?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That's a huge red flag.
Totally. And then there's the June 9th meeting, that Trump Tower meeting with the Russian lawyer, and how much effort Trump put into downplaying that.
Absolutely.
That always seems super suspicious.
Yeah, and the report really highlights this pattern of Trump trying to manage how things looked, to downplay anything that could hurt him.
Right.
And it's not just Comey, it's not just Sessions. This pattern, you see it with Flynn, with Manafort, even with Roger Stone.
So it's like you're saying a pattern of behavior, not just like a one-off thing.
Exactly.
Okay, so tell me more about that. What happened with Flynn, Manafort, and Stone?
Well, I think these cases, they're really a window into this pattern we're talking about. With each of them, you see Trump expressing support publicly, saying he's concerned about how they're being treated, even hinting at pardons in some cases. It's like he's sending a message. You stay loyal to me, I'll take care of you.
Right, exactly.
Wow. Okay, so let's break those down a little bit, starting with Flynn. Remind me, what was Flynn's deal again?
Okay, so Michael Flynn, he was Trump's national security advisor, but he had to resign pretty early on because he lied about his conversations with the Russian ambassador.
Oh, right, right.
And even though Trump knew about those lies, he kept defending Flynn publicly. It's almost like he was trying to reassure Flynn, tell him not to worry.
Like, don't worry, you're still good with me.
Yeah, something like that. And then you have Paul Manafort.
Right. What happened there?
Well, the report talks about how Trump would publicly criticize the prosecution of Manafort, saying he was being treated unfairly.
Yeah, I remember that. He kept calling Manafort a good man, a brave man.
He even mentioned the possibility of a pardon at one point.
Exactly. And keep in mind, this is all happening while Manafort is facing some very serious charges, like conspiracy against the United States.
Right.
And then there's Roger Stone. He ended up being charged with obstruction, witness tampering, lying to Congress, the whole 9 yards.
I remember that. Didn't the report specifically mention that Trump praised Stone for not flipping?
Yeah, and he contrasted Stone with other people who he implied made up stories to get a deal.
Wow. It really does seem like he's rewarding loyalty, or at least Caesar loyalty, and punishing anyone who cooperates.
Right, so we see this pattern, Flynn, Manafort, Stone. Every time someone close to Trump is in legal hot water, he publicly defends them, sometimes even dangles a pardon. So is that typical presidential behavior, or is he trying to obstruct justice? I mean, it's a fine line, isn't it?
That's the million-dollar question. And it's a question that the Mueller report, unfortunately, doesn't answer for us.
So what does it say?
It lays out the evidence, all the pieces of the puzzle, and it leaves it up to Congress to decide.
So we've got this pattern, but like you said, there's no smoking gun, right? It's all kind of circumstantial. So how does that work, legally speaking? How do you prove obstruction when it's not totally clear-cut?
Right, and that's what makes this whole thing so tricky. The defense argued that everything Trump did was within his rights as president.
Oh, okay.
That it was his prerogative to oversee these investigations, to remove officials if he wanted to.
So they're basically saying these were just normal presidential actions, not obstruction.
Exactly, and that's a big deal. Because remember, to prove obstruction, you have to show corrupt intent. It's not enough to just say, oh, he tried to influence things.
Yeah.
You have to prove that he did it specifically to protect himself and that he knew it was wrong.
Right, right.
And that is a very high bar to clear.
It is, yeah. So, I mean, bottom line, Mueller didn't really come down one way or the other on whether Trump actually obstructed justice, did he?
He didn't know. He didn't say Trump was innocent, but he didn't recommend charges either.
Okay.
He basically said, here's everything, Congress, you figure it out, like that puzzle analogy we used earlier.
Right.
He put all the pieces out there, but he didn't tell Congress how they fit together, what the picture was supposed to be.
Wow. So he really left it in their hands.
He did, which is why this whole thing became such a political football.
Right, because then it's not just about the law, it's about politics, too.
Exactly.
And I have to imagine, regardless of what you think about the conclusions, this whole thing probably didn't do any favors for public trust in the government, right?
No, not at all. I mean, the Mueller report, the whole thing, it really divided the country, eroded people's trust in institutions, fueled cynicism toward the political process.
Yeah, it's a lot to process, even now, years later. So where does this leave us? What are we supposed to take away from all of this?
Well, I think it's a reminder that even in a democracy, nobody is above the law, not even the president. But it also shows just how hard it can be to hold powerful people accountable, especially when you've got political gridlock, partisan divisions.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It's not as simple as we might like it to be. Even with a report like this, there are still so many unanswered questions.
Absolutely. This is one of those things that you could spend years studying and still not have all the answers.
Definitely. But even though we're coming to the end of our deep dive here, this conversation about presidential power, about accountability, about the rule of law, I mean, that's not over, is it?
Not at all. And it's a conversation we all need to be a part of. We need to stay informed, stay engaged.
You know, you're right. The Mueller report, it's a historical document. It's a reminder of this really specific moment in time. And the decisions that were made, the actions that were taken, they still have consequences today.
They do.
Hmm.
And it's up to each of us to learn from that, to hold our leaders accountable, and to demand transparency.
I think that's a great place to leave it. The Mueller report, it's complicated, it's messy, but it's definitely worth understanding. So to our listeners, thank you for joining us for this deep dive. Keep asking questions, keep learning, and let's keep this conversation going.